All right, so we're back with Mark. Mark, it's really interesting to me because, my grandpa, he was the top test pilot for the entire Navy, and then he was in charge of test flight for the entire Navy. He was a captain. He flew 60 missions in Vietnam, 55 missions in Korea. And I mean, this guy was at the very top echelon of having, astronauts come over to the house and go sailing on the boat as a kid, and I grew up, in the Florida Keys, wanting to be one of these astronauts, you know, uh, and it's only till, I realized that the dorks at the very top, they don't even believe in the system that they've created for us. Why should I believe in it? And that's what's really brought me closer to God. I was pretty agnostic my whole life. And, it's pretty much the exposure of these elite trust fund dorks and all of their Malachian bullshit that they do that's really brought, me to the conclusion that God is the most real thing that you could ever imagine.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. I'm glad you came to that conclusion. Yeah, for me, I think, in one way or another, smoking cannabis kind of brought me, I guess, back on track and maybe closer to God in some ways because for a while I was pretty atheistic. Now, maybe people who were raised in a different part of the country, they might think like, oh, smoking weed and God, like those don't add up because drugs are bad, you go to hell and all that. But on the contrary, there's a couple people I've spoken to, one of whom is an author. He's written a couple books on this subject, and it goes all the way back to the days of the Bible. And he talks about how in those days when they were, writing the Bible or, contemporary to when the Bible takes place, they were using cannabis to feel closer to God, to commune with God. And slowly over time, the priests have kind of taken that part of Mass out and left us with maybe, you know, uh, a watered down version of what we could be experiencing. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I was pretty atheistic before I smoked weed. So, my personal experience tells me that there's something about cannabis that can make a person more open, maybe open to spiritual ideas and things like that. So, yeah, that was the case for me. Now, I wouldn't recommend anybody take that same route because I had a pretty strong feeling as well to not go any further than weed. Some people they smoke weed and then next thing you know they're doing all these different drugs and not all
Yeah.
drugs are made the same. So that's why I'm definitely an advocate of cannabis, but I'm not an advocate of intoxication. I think people can even overdo it with weed, when it comes to like dabs and even like a bong hit can be very,
Yeah.
overwhelming. Me, I like to just smoke a little bit at a time and, ease my way into it. And, yeah, I get high every day. And maybe some people might think that it's a bad habit, but for me, it's definitely like a spiritual practice in a lot of ways.
I would agree 100%, and it's interesting because when you fight, pro like I do, you'll have to take a break, maybe 3 weeks before the fight, so that you can pass a stupid drug test. Like in Michigan, they're not going to give you a test for steroids, but they're going to give you a test for fucking marijuana, which makes no fucking sense at all, right? It's the
Yeah.
stupidest shit ever, But you don't want to pay $600 fine. You'd rather just quit and for a little bit and then come back to it. But it's so interesting to me because when you come back and you take that first freaking hit, you get so ripped and you just almost to the point where you're like uncomfortable from because you took a break, you know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah, it's pretty interesting how your tolerance plays into how you're affected by it and how much you can get done. I always tell people, like Joe Rogan has a good analogy. Like a hammer, you can either build a house with it or you can hit yourself in the dick with it. You know what I mean? It really is how you approach it, and I agree with you. You can, use it in the wrong way too much, or you can use it to, go run 10 miles, if that's how it helps you with your tunnel vision. So I agree with everything you said. I started boxing and partaking in that at pretty much the same time when I was 13 years old. And now I'm 40 and I'm getting in better shape, every day. I'm able to do things I could never do before. Like since I've gotten closer to God, I started jumping rope on the balance board. And now it's like I'm doing things I never thought that I could ever do. And I think this is us getting closer to our superhero powers that are latent, underneath, once we start opening up the levels that you guys talk about so much.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really really interesting way to put it. I mean, I've experienced the highs of martial arts, not on a professional level by no means, but I understand for sure like the uh leveling up that occurs when you push your body uh beyond what you thought your limitations were, and jump roping on a balance board. I mean, that's something that I think a very, very small portion of the population can even accomplish. But
Right, right. And it's
you know,
something that I never thought I'd be able to accomplish because it's not something I ever thought about. But I kept
mm,
seeing this balance board sitting there. No one ever used it. And when they did, they just get up and fall real quick. So I started using it and it became part of my routine, after I'd hit the bag or do regular jump rope or whatever. And then now I can do doubles on it and do crisscross. And my next goal is to do a backflip, and I'm getting older every day. I'm 40, and I'm still beating up these 20-year-olds. And I know it's because all I do is train, research, read, train, run, research, listen. I'm listening to you. I'm listening to Sam, Crow, all these guys when I'm running. I don't hardly ever listen to music anymore except when I'm teaching class. Now, let me ask you this. You're very, very deep down the rabbit hole. And recently I've gone down the Jordan Maxwell rabbit hole in the English language. And I mean, it's mind blowing that when you realize what the English language is and how they've hijacked it and tricked us into like sinning every time we speak.
mm, mm.
Isn't it interesting?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think words were definitely, chosen and emphasized, but I think it's also like the degeneration of culture. It's not necessarily something that is planned or puppeteered into place. It happens to be a little both, I think. Like, yeah, sure, the people who invented the words themselves maybe had like double or triple meanings in mind. But I think more so what's going on is like the level of consciousness on the planet, language reflects that, right? So in certain areas, maybe people are using words that are bringing them down and they don't even realize it. They might realize that their living situation or their environment or whatever, their life's not working out the way they want it to, but they're not necessarily going to make a connection that, oh, it's the words I'm using in the story of my life that I'm reiterating every day that's putting me in this place. So, yeah, in that sense, there has been some trickery because they don't necessarily tell us how powerful our own words are. But I don't know necessarily if, greeting people with hello necessarily will drag you to hell, right? But it is
No,
funny how those words can like create a certain atmosphere that would leave somebody in the neutral or worse, right? And I think that's where it should be the opposite, is that people should be encouraged and uplifted by our language and by our society in general, and if our society, speaking not just about America but the entire world, had that inclination, which I think in some respect it does, then our language will reflect that. So it's sort of like it's like the temperature. When you notice that these words are being used, you're sort of like understanding the degree at which the consciousness is operating, and yeah, I wonder what if you could even measure an effect like that, but I do think that it is life changing to at least be aware of the words you're using. Not necessarily, you don't have to reprogram yourself to never ever use the word hello again. I mean, that's kind of a ridiculous task. It would probably be very difficult unless you maybe moved to a different country and picked up a different language,
Or
right?
just say hi.
You
Yeah.
could say hi, but I think just naturally, like at least
Yeah.
for myself, I would find myself breaking that rule if I made it for myself just by accident. Just because someone will approach me and I'll say hello instead of hi, and then I'll be like, oh shoot, I said hello. So I don't think it necessarily you need to be strict about it, but I wonder. I think there is a measurable effect, at least being aware of it, right? You don't have to
Yeah.
be perfect and never make any mistakes, I think, but just aiming to think and speak accordingly, um is a is like a noble and honorable thing, regardless of if it has like a connotation of negativity or hell.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't necessarily believe that it works, like if we say hello, we're dragging ourselves down. I think that's just what many of the elite trust fund dorks that implemented some of these words have, what they believe. They believe that, every time you say football, baseball, basketball, you're invoking this, Canaanite ball dork, you know. Every time you say elite, so what I found in my research, and let me know if you found this correct, is that in Sumeria, ball was known as a tot, and the Hebrews called him El, and the Romans called him Saturn, the Greeks called him Kronos, and the Babylonians called him Moloch. And this is all the same guy in different parts of the world. And so then you start realizing that there's a lot of words that are invoking, maybe, I mean, who knows, but they believe that they're purposely put these names into our words, like Saturn Day, football, baseball, basketball, elite, who take place in the elections, who are in control of the electricity, and uh, our energy, our loosh is like a river, and they try to be in control of the flow, on each side of the river, where, what is it? It's a bank, and all of our energy, goes to the bank, so there's a lot of like trickery going on that I think is, if you go down the Jordan Maxwell rabbit hole, he explains it in very, very detail. And I've read a couple books and watched plenty of videos now, and it's kind of mind blowing, Now, I don't believe it works like they think it works. They could do a million rituals, they could sacrifice a bunch of children, and then they can come get in the ring and think that they're ready to win. And I would still beat their fucking ass, all of them one by one. So I don't think it works like the rituals work like they think it does. I just think that they've all been indoctrinated in their own psychopathic way to believe in this esoteric, occult, ritual stuff. You know what I mean? What do you think?
Well, there's definitely a case to be made that it wouldn't work under uh, those circumstances. I mean, especially if there's a threat of violence, I don't think the rituals are going to work very well because yeah, that definitely shakes anybody's plan up. But
Okay.
I think when it comes to the what Jordan Maxwell describes, there's a lot of I think, culture design that's gone into place where, you know, banking and the economy are sort of like artificial inserts into the natural world. So, in order for the artificial creation to flow cohesively with what, you know, where it's, you know, acting and being, they need to sort of coax it in, match the pattern that it's going to fall into. So I think that's partly where that comes from, is like, you know, as far as the names of ancient gods being used in like modern words and whatnot. Yeah, there's a way to see it, that, you know, okay, every time you utter that sound, you're sort of invoking that being, sure. But I don't know if it's necessarily that those words were chosen because they have those, you know, syllables, or those, you know, suffixes or prefixes. I think it's more to do with just the way etymology as a science unfolds. But that being said, the Jordan Maxwell stuff is fascinating. You know, it definitely makes you wonder, you know, how they got us into this situation where we're paying for our land and we're paying for our food, when there was a time on earth when these things were God-given rights. People were born in a place where they would be given land and they would be able to grow their own food and they would be able to provide for themselves and create a family, and that family would prosper instead of being, you know, essentially enslaved to the system, right? So the banks are just at the top of this enslavement system, and instead of labeling it as that, they can't just come out and say that, so they use all these fancy terms like currency and
Yeah.
banking, you know what I'm saying? But it falls into this archetypical thing where humans were like, you know, we might be more susceptible to it since it has a sort of ring to it, you know, like water. It flows into our lives. I might not have the most sound interpretation of that, but I'll admit I haven't looked at Maxwell's material in a while, but it is interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many connections, to so many words, and it really gets you thinking, after you find out all the other things that they've done and all the other lies that they've said and all the other psyops that they put on, and all the other rituals that they've done. I mean, the 77 fest at the Pentagon, I mean, that's one of my litmus tests that I give to people. I show them all the 77s going on at the Pentagon on 9/11, and how that number is attached to Aleister Crowley, and I want to see what they have to say. And many people, you can tell, are scared to try to answer because they know it's impossible that all these 77s are converging, um, at the same point on the same day, when three of them are built and three of them are by chance, right? Because you've got 77 feet high, it's built on the 77 longitude, it has 7,700 windows in it, and then it's hit by Flight 77, and the Mobile Command Center is Venus 77. And then how many victims on 9/11? 2977, minus the hijackers, who we don't even know are real, but they tell you 2977 victims, you
Hmm.
know? And there's, it's 7 floors. It's a pentagram built on the 77th parallel, so there's no way that you could have all those 77s happen and have it be a coincidence when three of them are built with planning and three of them are supposed to be just random.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you should interview S.K. Bain. He's written a book all about the
Yeah, I
wheel of
read it. I read his book, and
Oh, cool. You know.
obviously that's where I get that information from.
Oh,
Is from Escape Bain. So Yeah, I mean, I've read a lot of these researchers that you guys have had on. Like I said, I pretty much listened to all of Sam's shows and many of yours, and then many of the guests that you've booked. I've gone on and I've listened to their stuff because all I do is run and train. And like I said, for many years now, I've just been listening to you guys and taking in information from every angle. So, I feel like I got a really good grasp now of like what this reality is. And every day I learn something mind blowing every single day.
Wow. Yeah.
Like something new, mind blowing download connection every single day. And it's like the more I pray, the more these downloads happen, which just make the puzzle pieces fit together a lot easier.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I think there's a case to be made that exercise and physical activity is what our brain needs to continuously make those connections and keep those circuits, opening up for this new information. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I mean, can't say I've trained much in the past few years, but at one point in time I was training martial arts, and that was a big part of my awakening and sort of developing all of these ideas and getting to the point that I'm at now. I don't think I would be here without martial arts.
What do you do for exercise now? Usually, is your main go-to for exercise?
Well, when I'm not working, we'll go for hikes and things like that, but I'm not really
You
yeah,
should.
proud of myself in that respect. I think I could definitely be working out more. I had the excuse of, oh, the pandemic, but I definitely want to sign up for another martial arts gym. My old instructor, he's training at a local spot, and I was thinking about
You
going back
definitely
in
should.
there.
You
Yeah,
definitely should, man. You need to walk away from the research a little bit and remember you can always make more money, but you can never make more time.
right. That's true. Yeah, no, and I was never healthier than when I was training all the time, at least feeling wise. And, it definitely was peak physical experience when I was training. And, as a wrestler, we really went, you know,
Hard in the
past,
paint.
yeah, really past what I was doing in any class, not to say anything about, individual gyms or schools, but, you train 4 days a week for 2 hours compared to a wrestling practice, which is like 4 hours, 5 times a week. I mean, that was like overdrive. So after I stopped wrestling, I tried to like, fill that gap with martial arts for a few years. And it was great. It definitely changed my life in a really positive way. But I think I kind of, at one point I was like, all right, I'm done with this for now. I've never written off martial arts and said, oh, I'll never train again. But I did reach a point where I was like, I need to put this down for now, because in reality, it wasn't all that intentional. I broke my wrist, and right hand wrist is not a good break when you're a striker. So I was a
Yeah.
little just a little timid to get back into it, especially with jujitsu and like the wrist locks and whatnot. Because now I have a permanent surgery, so to speak, because I have a plate in my wrist. So there is one, I guess, is more of a mental block than a physical block. I'm sure there's guys who are still training with like, hip replacements or, uh, leg replacements and things like that. But yeah, it just that was it physically why I stopped training. And yeah, just haven't got back into it since the wrist break, unfortunately.
My one friend who trains with me, his name's Corey. I call him Corey the Conspiracy, because I try to attach a nickname to everyone. And he lost his leg in Afghanistan. And I mean, you should. I'll send you a video of him doing mitts, man. You'll really be impressed with the way this guy has made martial arts, part of his lifestyle and
Yeah.
boxing. And I think, we're going to get him a pro fight. Obviously, I'll be in charge of who he fights, so I'll get him, a fight that, is not some killer that's gonna come in and destroy him. You know what I mean? Like I'll get him something where, he has a good chance to win. You know what I mean? Because he's been training hard, and a lot of these guys turn pro, they got no business being pro.
Mm,
Like so, like some guys are like 0-11.
mm,
You know
mm.
what I mean? Like 0-100. Like but they keep getting fights. So I want to make sure that if he does decide to do this, that we do it the right way. You know.
Yeah. One of my really good friends from childhood has a cousin who I ran into a couple times through martial arts. And he was born with just one hand. So on his right limb, there's nothing past his elbow. And he is one of the most skilled strikers I've ever had to go against. And
Yeah.
his ground game is excellent too. And I think you find that, I mean, maybe it's more likely when someone has something like that happen to them at birth because it's with them through their whole life rather than like a war injury. But I mean,
Yeah.
either way, it is amazing to see how humans can overcome something like that. Like I remember sparring him and getting hit with that paw of his and just thinking like, damn, like that hurt like a normal hand couldn't. He's hitting you straight on with an elbow, all elbow. I mean,
with like an elbow nub. Yeah.
right. I mean, he's a tough son of a bitch, that guy. I don't know his record or his career, but I'm almost certain he did pro. But that was one of the difficult things for him is like, it's not easy for a guy like that to make a career in pro MMA because a lot of guys will pass up a fight with someone like that on the
Because
fear
it's a
that,
lose lose. Yeah, it's a
yeah,
lose lose. Because it's like, oh, if you beat him, you beat a guy
right,
with one arm, and everyone's gonna come down on you. And if you lose to him, you lost to a skilled guy with one arm,
right.
and now everyone's gonna come down on you. So I could definitely see that, man. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah,
Do
well,
you,
he's to his credit, he's got a winning record and a school that he runs now himself. So yeah, I think there's cases where that people overcome that. I think sports are coming around and fight sports are coming around to open to people like that because I think in fight sports it's one of the rare situations where even someone like that can level the playing field. Whereas maybe in basketball or soccer or another sport, there's just no room for someone with a disability. Whereas with, this kind of sport, fight sports, someone with an impairment can maybe have an edge over someone who doesn't, right? In Nick Newell's,
especially mentally. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Because they're already so used to finding solutions where other guys
right,
already want to find excuses. You
right.
know what I mean?
Exactly. Solutions where there others find excuses. I could tell you help guys get really good with a
Yeah,
phrase
I
like
always like to say that humanity has been using excuses to rationalize their mediocrity for thousands of years.
Mm,
And that's something that, I kind of just came up with myself. But, it really is true that,
powerful.
people use excuses to rationalize in their own brain their own mediocrity. And
Yeah.
that's why I get up every day at 4:30 in the morning, hit the bag at 6, and then, run and start doing research or go build on a house or something, and then come back for noon and I hit the bag. No matter if anyone shows up for class or not, I'm still going to hit the bag. I'm still going to go through my spiritual martial arts routine. And then at night it's a 5 o'clock class, a 6 o'clock class, and a 7 o'clock class. So I'm busy all day. I get a few breaks, and during those breaks, I read, I run, I'll take a nap, or I'll pray and I'll meditate. And I also have to match fighters at the Motor City Casino in Detroit. So many times I'm calling fighters and trying to negotiate contracts and stuff like that. So I got a lot of stuff going on, but you know, I'm always needing to learn something new, man. I'm always needing to put on my family thinks I'm crazy podcast or,
Same.
Sam or Crow or, so many of you guys have really like changed my life. And, I think I decided to start this podcast because I felt like it's my duty having 4 kids to speak up and and try to shake people awake because where are we heading? Where are we heading right now, Mark?
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm glad I can inspire you. The little that I do makes its way into your life because shit, by the sound of it, you're an inspiration, John. And yeah, I'm glad that there are people like you fighting the good fight and thinking ahead towards the future because that's really what your sentiment speaks to in me, as far as thinking about our future. I don't have any children, but I definitely am concerned about, seven generations ahead as the Native Americans who, felt and lived that way talk about, right? Seven generations ahead and how we all need to, live each day considering them, because they are us, right? So, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen in the world. One thing I will say is that I think it's not new for things to seem this chaotic. So if that's you know, any way to feel a little bit of comfort, at least this isn't anything new. I think if anything, we're just overwhelmed with messaging from people who don't have our best interests in mind, like
Yeah,
overwhelmingly so, more than probably ever in human history. We're being bombarded with messages that are really self-serving, depending on which interest, whether it's the government or corporations or, health services, ironically, services, right? I mean, like we're freaking robots and, we need a new oil change or we need a part, replacement. Like that's how we're being treated in the medical system these days. So I think that we're going to have to evolve past all that just as quickly as we evolved into all that. And it doesn't necessarily mean throwing everything out. I think it just means upgrading so that those types of what seems like now, invasive advertising and, pharmaceuticals that poison and addict us. And I think all of these things can be upgraded from a perspective of holistic and comprehensive thinking, and maybe even a more divine inspired way of going about life where we integrate God's actual creation into our understanding and our application of science. Because right now, it seems like God's creation, which is nature, is just being exploited by science. It's not being, used to its fullest extent. It to use nature to its fullest extent would be to flow with it, to be symbiotic with it, to understand it, to grow and change it for the better. I think right now we're just kind of making a mess of the place, so we're gonna have to figure out how to get over that. And first we need to stop being distracted by these corporations that want to tear apart our families and keep us out of church and keep us out of school and on drugs. And what we really need is community, and that's where you find all those places, or that's where you find that is in some of those places, or at least you used to be able to find it in some of those places. But yeah, I'm not here to tell people which religion to follow or anything, but I think everybody, no matter who you are, needs to find a community and get to being having a say in your immediate environment, because that's what really I think a lot of people are falling victim to, is we've put ourselves in a position where we don't have our own authority, and we fall victim to others who are just taking advantage of our ignorance or our weakness, or you name it, right? So
yeah,
I think people need to realize that they have a lot more control over their lives if they take it. Like yourself. I mean, you've taken control of your health, I'm sure. You've probably taken control of your mind. I don't know you, John, your whole trajectory of your life, but I imagine you're probably in a better place than you were when you started training and working on yourself and working on your body, right? Because
right,
all of these things have like an overlapping effect on your life. And as you change one thing, other things start to improve. So I think slowly but surely we may get there. And it may be right now that we're dealing with like the messy phase of technology, but I think we could possibly, optimistically speaking, get to a point where technology works with us instead of against us and works with God instead of against God, you know?
I mean, I totally agree with everything you just said. Let's switch gears a little bit because I don't want to keep you too long, and I just have a few. I want to get your perspective on a few different things because you are so read up on everything. Mark, what are we living on? Are we living on a spinning ball going through the universe, flying 66616 around the sun, and the Earth is tilted at 66.6 degrees, and the speed of sound in knots is 666 knots, and I mean, what are we living on? What do you think?
Well, the shape of it, I can't comment because I haven't been in a plane myself in at least 2 decades. So I don't really remember what it looks like from up there. But I definitely don't believe what NASA tells us. And I don't believe,
Okay, okay,
yeah.
good.
And I should say, um, I've had a really interesting conversation with this guy, Simon Shack, who flat earthers and round earthers both dislike his theory. So, there are guys out there who have even crazier
And
theories.
what's his theory?
Well, so he's actually picking up the work of a guy named Tychos Brahe, and that guy was around back 400 years ago when these astronomers that we know were making up all this bullshit that NASA's gone and run with, right? Where the dorks like Galileo and Kepler and all them. Well, apparently Kepler poisoned this guy Tycho Brahe because he didn't want anybody finding out what this guy wrote about, and then he took a lot of his writings and took credit for them and rewrote the parts that he liked and left out the parts that he didn't. And when I see something like that, the way my mind works, I'm like, okay, so he allegedly possibly murdered a guy, covered up his work, and stole what worked for him. Sounds to me like this Tycho guy might have been onto something. And yeah, Simon's taken that and brought it back to life and written a book all about it. It's called the Tychosium. And it's a different model than the flat earth, but it definitely works with some of the flat earth observations, the things that people are observing and then attributing to flat earth. So that to me is interesting, but I don't really have a conclusion because again, like I haven't flown high enough to see, and
Yeah,
I don't. It's not exactly my biggest interest. I also know that I don't need that to know that the world is lying to me. You know what I mean? Some
yeah,
people that might be their big red pill, right? For me, it came in a different way. So I don't negate that for people who do believe flat Earth versus round Earth or whichever. I'm someone who's kind of agnostic when it comes to that argument. I did recently talk to Sean Hibbler, and he convinced me of some things. But then I had people email me and say, other things that were like contrary to that. So, it's interesting because as a host, I try to remain neutral and have good conversations with everybody, regardless of what their opinions are.
yeah,
And then my
absolutely.
my audience still just attack me either way. I think that's the case for every show. When you get
Yeah,
enough people, you're gonna have some detractors. They're usually
yeah.
the loudest. So, but
Listen, I
yeah,
always try to tell the fighters, if you got haters, you're doing it right, man. You're doing
exactly
it right, So just, realize that, no matter what, you're gonna have some haters, and that's because you're
right.
doing it right, Mark.
Right. Well, and I think there's a case to be made with flat Earth for that because a lot of the round earthers hate on that idea so bad, and they can't, their minds go like cuckoo crazy when they hear somebody suggest the Earth is flat. That's exciting to me. Anytime somebody can make somebody that upset, that there's some truth there, and I do think that we're being lied to about a lot of things. So why wouldn't they lie to us about space and all that? I don't think what we saw with the moon landing was exactly what they told us either. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot of strange stuff going on. It's just, yeah, astronomy, astrology, those aren't really my like passions, even though I find them interesting. So I guess that one's more on the back shelf for me as far as like topics that I'm going to be getting into with my show. Maybe again, I'll have like another guy on to talk about it, but it's definitely something that doesn't pique my interest as much as other things.
Did you watch Hibbler's movies?
Oh yeah, yeah. I watched the first one,
Okay.
and I'll be watching the third one and the second one because I do want to have him back on to talk about that. You know, to follow up with him on the first conversation.
The
It was a
second
real
one's
treat.
really good about Antarctica. I really like that. I mean, I like them all. I think I try to use those as a red pill for people that are such NASA dorks, so that they can realize that, hey, they're lying to you about this, perhaps they're lying to you about some other things too, What would you say your specialty, in this research realm is?
Wow, yeah. Well, at first I wasn't really considering myself a specialist in anything. You know, I've always just been interested in this subject. But then once I kind of had the podcast for a couple hundred episodes, I thought, you know, I'd like to distinguish myself a bit and kind of find something that I can, research like one given topic to go and talk about on other shows and whatnot. So I decided to start looking into my local area and just trying to figure out what's going on here where I'm from, not just this state, Connecticut, but also New England, and maybe eventually I'll get to New York City and Boston. But yeah, I'm just really fascinated in like local stuff and like what's going on around here. And so that led me naturally to look into Yale University and Skull and Bones. And there's a lot of occultism there that's going on. There's a lot I had to learn about with alchemy and Christianity and different aspects of the history of the colonies. And I found out that Connecticut had an alchemist as a governor at one point, this guy named John Winthrop the Younger. So, yeah, tons of stuff. I mean, really, I'm not a specialist in any one interest. I just follow what intrigues me at that any given moment, and
Right.
I feel like I have a good recall at the least for the stuff that I am interested in, and I can kind of retain enough information to talk about it and write about it. So I've been kind of putting together some stuff on my Substack, and yeah, I guess history, to put it very broadly, would be like my interest, if I had to say, because a lot of my show ends up being about history. So
Yeah.
we do talk about like alternative science, fringe stuff, and
Is
you
it
know.
his story or our story?
Well, that's back to the whole names and words and whatnot. I think stories are stories, right? So yeah, no, I don't take it as a gender. I don't give my pronouns or anything like that. So I'm not really concerned with that word, but no, I think it's our story, not his story, that I'm more fascinated in. But you need to know the story from the authority to understand
Absolutely.
maybe what
That's what
they're
I try to
leaving
always
out.
explain.
We got it. We can't just throw everything out, like, because in like it's like playing a game of poker. Like you wouldn't want to like play poker with like partitions so you couldn't see the other players and only the table. You would want to
Yeah.
you want to see the other players so you could kind of
Read
see
them.
exactly. And that's what you're when you really get into the subject of history, like you learn to read what the author's life was like rather than what they're writing about, because a lot of times what they're writing about isn't as important as who they were and where they were at that point in time. And when you can understand it from that point of view, you can maybe get more out of a book, like especially older nonfiction books, like the Odyssey, not necessarily nonfiction in that case, but there's books like the Iliad and the Odyssey that are literally meant to be read. And once you read them, it changes your consciousness and like upgrades it somehow, right? So there are books that work like a key that unlocks a part
Yeah.
of your mind that maybe wasn't open until you read that book, which to me that's like part of my obsession with books is like always looking for the next
Yes.
information, new, insights and things that I could, connect to. And sometimes I find books where the author's still alive and I can interview them, but more often than not, a lot of these authors have already lived a lifetime and several lifetimes have happened in between. So yeah, a lot of these books are too old for me to interview the author, but yeah, slowly but surely, I'm making my way through the books you see behind me, and I'll interview hopefully all of the authors.
Many people as you can.
Yeah,
I
hopefully.
know, I think from what I understand, Mark, you're very skeptical of the entire Tartarian um, narrative. Is that true? Is that correct?
Well, it depends, because I do think that there are sources for that information that are more credible than others, and there's definitely a case to be made with Tartaria in Asia. But I think when we use the word Tartaria to explain like old world buildings here in North America, it's not that accurate, right? So I do think that there's old world stuff here in North America, but it's
But
just
it
it
doesn't
falls.
have to be called Tartaria. It could
Yeah,
be any name of the same type of
well,
people that were living.
yeah, well, Tartarian is a specific group of people, so that would be like, and swap out Tartarian and just say Chinese, right? I mean, if we said that no, everything in America was built by the Chinese, there'd be a political issue there, don't you think? Like maybe China would want to spread a rumor like that and then maybe, cause some kind of conflict. They do that
Yeah.
kind of thing over islands in the Pacific Ocean, right? And when you look into Tartaria, there's a lot of like people who work for KGB in Russia who are a part of spreading this information. So I'm not exactly like one of these demo idiots who thinks that Russia bad and Ukraine good and all this nonsense. I know that there's a proxy war going on, but the Tartaria stuff, when you look into it, some of it looks like Russian propaganda and some of it's just interesting like free energy information that I think was a part of life in the 19th century. Like there were inventors, there were people inventing really cool stuff, and I'm sure that maybe the timetable goes back maybe to 1500s possibly. Maybe there were ancient civilizations that existed, but I just think that it
Yeah. Okay.
there's just it's not that I'm skeptical about Tartaria. I just want more accuracy from
Right.
that topic before I'm a proponent of it, right? Because right now it does seem a little dodgy. Like if you go around saying every building was actually built by a different civilization, well you should be able to find some sort of evidence that that the current occupants didn't build it themselves, right? But when you try to do that for maybe where I live, I don't know about California or places on the West Coast, it might be a different situation. Florida, there's a bunch of old world stuff in Florida, hence, Dr. Narco Longo doing all his research. And he agrees with me. He's like, yeah, I don't really think all of this is Tartarian. He's like, I think there were Tartars that were around and maybe they were, building some weird stuff and that stuff got
They
destroyed.
could have been North American giants.
Well, yeah, and
They
that's
have
the
to be
thing.
called Tartarians.
Yeah, it's way more complicated than one group in
Right.
one country than.
I see. I
You know what I
agree.
mean? So I like the topic. I just think that some people take that and they run with it, and then they find like weird old obscure stuff from the 1900s and the 1800s, and they think like, okay, I'm just gonna post this on TikTok and say like, ooh, it's an old Tartarian. It's just to me it gets very like vague, and I just need it to be more accurate. Like
Right.
maybe people don't like that. That's fine. I'm not in this to win people over. I'm in this to learn stuff and share honest information, right? So if I see
Yeah.
something that thinks it seems a little fishy, I'm going to point it out. But I do like the old world stuff, and I mean, I could talk about that on and on. I found a bunch of old world stuff that, for the most part, you can't explain with the conventional narrative, but you won't find that in any of
Yes.
the Tartarian videos because they're not looking for that kind of stuff. You know, they're not looking for Viking or Chinese civilizations. Because there's a guest I had on my show recently who told me about a Buddhist temple in Canada that was built like 2000 years ago. So that means there were Chinese Buddhists in, Northeast Canada over, in like around the same time Jesus was being crucified, you know? So like there's an example of old world, but because it's not Tartarians, it's not as interesting for some reason, right? So not to you, but for people in general
Right.
who like this topic.
To me the tartar when I hear the word tartaria, I just think historical lie almost.
Mm,
Like I just think of the mud flood, the melted buildings, you know what I mean? Like something definitely happened.
yeah,
There was some sort of reset, and the narrative is a lie. And so I think you're right. I got caught up because my TikTok is Tartarian crime fighter, you know what I mean? But that's used as just like I'm trying to expose the lie of the history because, like, I mean, really, you realize that. I mean, everything's a fucking lie almost. Almost everything that they tell us is a lie when you start looking into the narrative of these buildings. And then you look at the Native Americans, and one question that I saw was, well, wouldn't the Native Americans seen these great buildings when they got here?
right.
In the Native Americans argue amongst themselves over the narrative that there was great builders here with great technologies and buildings when they got here, and they
Yeah.
called them the Anasazi. And then you go and look in Wikipedia and what the Anasazi is, and they just make it seem like it was a different type of Native American tribe, when these Native Americans are actually fighting amongst themselves between ancient stories that were passed down and then what they were indoctrinated by when the takeover happened.
Right.
So it's super interesting to me how much, like, what I mean, was George Washington even real? Like, I mean, was there a reset just 200? I mean, you find out that Disney's dad was a carpenter for the World Fairs. And
Mm,
you're like, wait, what? So wait, one propaganda leads into the next, and now the king of historical propaganda is now son is the king of ritual and magic spells that all the kids watch today. You know what I mean? It's just mind blowing when these connections happen.
mm. Yeah, I mean, as far as the World's Fairs go, like that was an example of elite people trying to create a new paradigm and control the narrative. So yeah, who knows what was on the other side of that time period
Yeah,
that they were hiding, right? It could have been an old world civilization that they erased and now they just give us this vision of Native Americans as like spear throwing, like stone bow and arrow having like basically primitive people, right? That's where
yeah,
if you go to some of these museums, that's what you see. Meanwhile, Dr. Narco Longo, he showed me some really interesting photos of Native Americans in very complicated outfits that look just like
yeah,
outfits from what we would think like of Asian cultures, right? Or even like Mediterranean cultures and African cultures. So, yeah, there's a lot of I think racial elements going on there where the European colonizers, they didn't want any evidence of a sophisticated society here. Otherwise, they couldn't maybe justify their abominational genocide, uh, because people would, it's just part of war. You don't just kill everybody, you erase any evidence of them, right? I think that's unfortunately something that's been going on for thousands of years. It's not like a European invention. That's part of what's so frustrating about social justice warriors and their bullshit because they just say whitey bad and they don't explain why. There's no nuance. There's no it's just, oh, white people are the source of all evil on the planet. And it's like, well, it's not as simple as that. Yeah, sure, Europeans were historically like dominating things for the past 1,000 years in one part of the world, but that they didn't. So it's a complicated subject, and I think that there's a lot of like really sensitive topics in front of it that are making it hard for people to get to the bottom of the truth. But as far as like mud floods go, Native Americans have stories of these giants that turned to stone after these giant mud storms, and the Thunderbirds struck the giants down with lightning. And there's a guy that you can find on YouTube named Roger Spur. His YouTube channel is called Mud Fossil University, and he has a
Mud fossil.
video. Yeah, Mud Fossil University. He has a video where he shows you, he takes a raw piece of chicken, puts it in mud, okay, in like a fish tank, and then he takes a like battery and electric wires and puts a current through the mud, and that piece of like flesh chicken turns into a mineralized stone, okay? So if that could happen in a
Wow.
lab with under the right circumstances, think about it. Maybe these mountains and these like big, huge things that
Wow.
we see as rocks used to be living flesh, but they got turned into stone during some kind of crazy cataclysm, right? So I
Tons of
definitely,
pictures are showing, I mean, tons of pictures are showing things that look like giants and giant faces and giants laying down. And I
right?
mean, it's the whole TikTok is flooded with that type of stuff, right? You
Right.
know what I mean? I mean, how real is that stuff with artificial intelligence and AI pictures being created? You know, it's like, what can we really believe is evidence anymore, Mark?
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating. I'm not like such a skeptic that I need everything to be proven by scientists. I think scientists are probably some of the most foolish and maybe the most propagandized of the human populace, right? Like they go through the most conditioning and training. They're in
Yeah.
school for like 20 years, right? Like especially like doctors and lawyers, right? So these are the people that are the most entrained, and we're expecting them to be the authority. Meanwhile, they're living in an illusion to some extent. And I think now that the information age is upon us, like we're going to have more people that take a route like you and I, where they go about doing their own research and they don't rely on authority for their mental intellectual faculties. And I think that's where we're really going to see the world start to change for the better, is when smart people are not held back by authority. I mean, that could maybe lead to some crazy mad scientists like Nikola Tesla, but I think it also would lead to some good stuff too. Nikola Tesla, some people think he was really great. I think he was not a bad guy, but like
I
the
think he was
FBI
trying to
clearly.
reverse engineer the technology that they found,
Mm,
after the parasites took over. I think he
right.
was more of a reverse engineering it. And then once he maybe figured it out, that's when they clipped his balls.
Well, and the funny thing is, if you go back further, there were other people like him that are less memorable. We just don't have like a car named after them now. But yeah, maybe 10 years ago, Nikola Tesla probably wouldn't be such a like a known person. I think he's a little more well known now. But there's others like John Worrell Keeley, who I think was like some years older than Tesla, and he was working on free energy tech. So I bet, the case could be made that the further back you look, the more sophisticated. I mean, think about music, classical music, right? Those guys were alive in the 1600s. They were like, geniuses. Nobody's replicated or gone beyond that level of like Beethoven and so on when it comes to music. So it doesn't seem like we've been evolving in an upward trajectory. It seems like we're going backwards. Like the further you look backwards, the more advanced things are. Why could that be if we weren't like coming from a more advanced civilization in the
Yeah.
past,
I mean,
right?
we can't build like, I mean, we don't have anything that could lift these stones.
The pyramid. Yeah.
There's nothing we have that could lift anything like that. And if you think a million slaves pulled that up with a rope, I mean, you're
Well,
fucking,
we could be looking at at an advanced like form of concrete, like a geopolymer. Like concrete's not necessarily a. I don't think it's the same as a geopolymer, but I was talking to a guy on my show who thinks that maybe they actually had a science that we obviously can't do today. I'm not saying that we can do it today, but like when we think about things through conventional means, like, oh, you'd have to lift that stone and put it there. Yeah,
yeah.
I guess that would be quite a feat, but what if they were even more advanced than that? And instead of building some huge machine that could just like lift this giant stone and carry it for very far, maybe they actually knew how to create stone that big and they could just like pour certain ingredients the same way we mix concrete. Like, because if
Oh,
somebody looked at a concrete bridge and they didn't know what concrete was, they might say the same thing. Like, how did they lift that to get that there? How did they shape that stone?
yeah.
Meanwhile, they don't know that, oh, this is like a type of science where you take, liquid and it forms into a solid concrete after or under the right circumstances. So maybe that's what we're looking at with these advanced ancient civilizations. Maybe they had some techniques that we've just forgot because we're not living under leaders who care about us. We're living under these parasites who just want to use us like slaves.
Do you ever wonder about mental levitation of these blocks or anything like that? Like some
Well, the,
spiritual power?
yeah, there's the guy down in Florida, Coral Castle, Edward Lee Scanhan or something like that.
Yeah.
He was an interesting character because he was so, I guess, according to people who knew him, kind of frail and tiny. So it wouldn't make sense that he could lift
Built
any of
this
those
huge
stones.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and according to people who knew him really well, he kind of like hinted at having this levitation device. So, yeah, I think that place indicates levitation is possible. There's a bunch of stone structures around New England that are like boulders perched on top of much smaller stones. So you'll have like five or six like really tiny stones and then a huge, massive boulder on top of
Yeah.
it. And scientists are like, oh, those are just glacial erratics, and the glaciers push them into that spot. But
Sure.
make any sense. And the Native Americans, they even say that all of their stories are like that, a giant threw that into place,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
some shaman, a great powerful man, lifted it into place, but they're not saying with his hands. Like they're thinking like maybe with his mind. That at least that's how I interpret it.
I'm
So
reading this book right now, and one of my problems, Mark, is I read like 10 books at a time. You just like read a book and finish it, and it's just like, but I'm so like ADD when it comes to books. One of those books I'm reading right now is the ancient giants that ruled America in the Smithsonian cover up,
okay.
and I mean it's fucking mind blowing. I'll send you the oh, you probably got it.
I think it sounds familiar to a title that I have. We might have the same book. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm just reading it online. I'm just reading it on my phone, right? You know what I mean?
okay.
But yeah, it's mind blowing, Mark, and it's everything that we're talking about. And yep, that's the one right there. Yes, my man. So
Richard
have you got
Dewar.
into that one yet?
Yeah, this book is really good. I was thinking at first you were talking about another book by Fritz Zimmerman, which you might be interested in getting because it's like you said you're from Florida, but you go to Michigan often. Is that right?
I was born in Key West. Yeah, I lived in the Florida Keys, and I grew up on a freaking sailboat on a rich island. And then my parents got divorced, and I went to Texas in third and fourth grade, and I literally got beat up every day for about 600 days. Like it was culture shock. Like I went from rich kid on a boat to living and being the only white kid in a black neighborhood where I just got picked on because I couldn't really fight. And I got beat up every day for about 2 years. And then I moved back up here with my mom, even though I wanted to stay with my dad. I just didn't want to be beat up anymore.
Huh.
Like I was just so sick of it. And then I came up here and I found boxing, right?
Yeah.
And then I ended up going to the University of Michigan. I coached boxing on their team. I turned pro. I have my own gym now, and now I'm 15-1 as a pro, and I'm in charge of the Motor City Casino. And I fought my first MMA fight the day after my dad died, and totally, which kind of made me famous in the state of Michigan because I was just a boxer who did this crazy spinning back kick, and I broke the guy's ribs, and everyone was really shocked, right? So then that moment, staying the course and doing what I was supposed to do literally changed my life. But it was all part of God's plan to take me away from this rich, spoiled fucking lifestyle that I was in, where I was going to grow up probably a piece of shit. And he put me and got me in check real fast, and then I came up here and I found martial arts and boxing,
Yeah.
and it changed my life forever. And that's where we're at now.
That's powerful, man. I'm glad you shared that with me. I asked because I know Michigan is close, obviously, to Ohio, and they write about Michigan in this book, The Nephilim Chronicles, a travel guide to the ancient ruins in the Ohio Valley. So, yeah, all over that part of the states, there are all these mounds. You might have seen some.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's definitely some connections between the giants and the mounds, and I'm sure there's mounds in Michigan not too far from where you're at. But that's powerful stuff, brother. Being around those mounds, I mean, you want to find a place to meditate or find a place to connect with something, maybe think about going to a mound.
Yeah, I always think to myself, there's nothing good in Ohio. It's the biggest landlocked piece of shit state, but you realize that there's a lot of hidden gems in Ohio and a lot of things going on there,
Yeah.
And there's this new, I don't know if you've heard of it, but in Detroit, there's this new portal statue. It's like a Stargate. It's
Oh
right in
yeah.
front of the
That's not new
Scientology.
though.
It's right in front of the Scientology building, and it's got all this demonic
That's in
stuff.
Hart Plaza, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's not demonic though. I mean, I saw that TikTok video that you're talking about that broke it down, but I've actually had a guy on my show who wrote a whole book about that spot, and there's a whole bunch of esoteric symbolism there, but it's not a demon portal like that guy on TikTok said. I mean, that's kind of, I mean, you could look at it that way, and maybe if you look at it that way, you might actually make that a reality. But I think actually
Yeah.
believing in stuff like that brings that kind of stuff into being. Like, I'm not saying demons don't exist if you don't believe in them, but there's a certain level of reality that if you think about demons, you can attract them, right? So I would never want to put my intention or
Well,
my
I'm gonna go down
attention
there and check it
on it.
out for myself. I'm gonna
Check it
make a.
out. Check it out with the knowledge that that place was built using spiritual mathematics, like in a sense that like the same way that the pyramids were built. Like you wouldn't look at the pyramid and think, "Oh, that's a demon pyramid," right? So,
Yeah, but this thing has like a bunch. It's like there's one part of it where there's all these faces that look like they're pushing through, and there's hands, and it looks like just like a
well,
depiction of
listen,
people suffering in
I'm not
hell.
gonna I'm not gonna persuade you to think like me. Maybe you think it's demons. That's fine, but I do
Well,
encourage you. What?
I'm pretty impartial to it. I'm just
Yeah,
saying what it is.
yeah.
Like now,
Well, I
when I
know
say
that.
demonic, that's because of the video I saw, right? And that's what he was explaining. And then I see the one picture of all the hands sticking out and all these faces that look like they're kind of in pain. And then that's why I
Yeah.
kind of
Well, art.
infer maybe it is a little demonic.
Yeah, I mean, hey, it could be. There's tons of examples where artists make demonic statues and whatnot. But I'm not saying Osama Noguchi, who built that, wasn't like doing weird shit. But I just from what I understand, there's more to it than it's just a portal for demons or a portal to hell. It has to do with Osiris and even connects to like the motor companies that made Detroit the Motor City and Horus and there's so much symbolism, but you should talk to my friend Chad because he lives in Michigan and he's researched that place a bunch.
Yeah.
Him and I do a podcast together, and he's written a book just about that site. It's called Stargate Detroit because he believes it's a Stargate. It's like a consciousness portal.
Yeah, I listened. He was on Tinfoil Hat, right? And he was
Yeah,
talking about that in the mounds.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I listened to that, and that's what I'm saying. Like, it's something. I was just wondering if you heard about it. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, if
No,
you knew about.
I don't mean to, tell you you're wrong or anything. I'm not saying that. I just that TikTok video did rub me the wrong way. So I don't mean to take that out on you. I just, yeah,
Yeah.
I saw
No,
it. I
I see.
saw it
I
for
see what
sure.
you mean, though. It's just like, and I'm kind of just regurgitating what I heard on the
Yeah,
video, to explain it. But I
I
don't
get it.
necessarily think it's demonic. I just think, there's always more to these things than meets the eye.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, and what's weird about that being kind of, you know, well known now is at the same time that that's becoming popular, I just found out that that guy who built the one in Detroit, he also built one near Skull and Bones at Yale University. It's this underground art garden, and it's got a pyramid, it's got a cube, and it's got like a basically a circle. And yeah, hey, maybe that one's demonic. I take back what I said because it's underground and it's definitely weird. I mean, I can't say for sure what it is, but I think in the minds of the elite who set this stuff up, they're not necessarily trying to win the favor of demons. I think they hope that the demons stay away from them and bother like the normal people. I think they're trying to invoke the gods, but what we think about with God and gods is two different things. Like the Christian God, that's a whole different thing than the gods that these people think of. In a Christian interpretation, you might think of those gods as demons, right? But they don't think of them as demons. They think of them as gods, right? So it's like it definitely it's more nuanced than that, but it's yeah,
Well, my thing, Mark, is that if 800,000 children are going missing in the United States, and if that is a true stat, and all these kids are being sacrificed, and this adrenochrome shit is going on, then this isn't the gods, this
right,
is
right.
this
Well,
is evil,
yeah,
and
that's different though. I mean, there's definitely connections, but yeah, I agree with you. There's no other
I tend
explanation
to think
for
that at
that.
the very top, there's Moloch and Ishtar, and everybody, all these trust fund dorks are trying to keep them happy. And you see that in all the and every logo is a Saturn logo. I mean, the Starbucks logo is Ishtar. I mean, if you really study all these logos, it's complete Saturn worship, which Saturn is the sixth planet from the sun and 666 and all the 666s in science. I mean, what do you think about all the 666s that you find in science? I mean, that's obviously put there on purpose to make fun of us as some sort of revelation of method, correct?
Yeah, it could be, man. It could be. I'm not sure.
I
I've
found like
heard
100.
multiple interpretations of that.
Huh?
I've heard different interpretations of it. Some people think that that's like associated with Christ. Other people say it's associated with the beast, 666. So, they invert things. So who knows? It could be
Yeah.
something that used to be a good thing and then they've flipped it upside down so that people can't understand the truth of it. I think that happens a lot. But, when it comes to like 666, anytime I see that, I just think like, oh, some like dork who thinks he's edgy for being a Satanist. You know, it's just that is kind of what a lot of this amounts to. But there's real occultists and real like cults that are doing like demonic shit going, you know, that
Yeah.
it's just not the same as like what these celebrities are pretending that they're a part of, you know. Maybe Jay-Z, maybe the people who make it to like the top of those, you know, realms, but I really don't think that it's as prevalent as people think. I think
Well,
really
I
what it is like this special forces, you know, military criminals, you know, and the elite working with those sort of elements, CIA, you know, those areas where they're able to go above the law. Yeah, celebrities, they're more just like they're controlled, just like, you know, used as puppets to kind of keep people entertained, and then, you know, they have blackmail on them if they have them go to these sick parties and whatnot, you know. But I
well,
don't think that they're like taking over the hierarchy. Like Brad Pitt's not going to be in charge of anything, like,
no, I think they're
oh,
all just lower. They're all just doing what they're told.
yeah.
But I mean, like how they've hidden these logos and these 666s and everything. Like for example, the Washington Monument is 555 feet high, but it's 6,660 inches tall. You know, it's 666 inches wide, right? When they say carbon is the building block of life, um, it's six neutrons, six electrons, six protons. The difference between freezing and the human body temperature is 66.6 degrees.
Mm.
So you've got it's like all the 77s. It just is like I found 100 of them, and at some point you're like, okay, this is just fucking weird. And it's clearly like, in my opinion, since they're so obsessed with this revelation of method, it's just part of their requirement to their Moloch dorky,
Mm.
person that they. I mean, is that who they have to require this revelation of method? Because their symbolism is clearly going to be their downfall.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think it's as good as guess yours is mine. You know, when it comes to the numerology and whatnot and the gematria, there are better people to talk to than me. You know, that's another one that I'm not really an expert in. And as far as like my mind goes, like math, it was never my strong suit. So, like whenever I see all those numbers, I could recognize patterns and whatnot, sure, but uh, I don't know how much like that
Well,
adds.
yeah, well, like CERN's logo is just a six. It's a clearly a 666. It's built on an ancient site,
Well, yeah, that logo is definitely weird, but that doesn't take like, you know, gematria to make it
but it's
weird.
just one more 666 to the 100 that they've
Yeah.
hit around. That's
Well,
all.
it's a powerful number. It invokes a reaction at the very least. I mean, whether it's a demonic number or not, I mean, I don't think it's any more demonic than the number 999. I mean, it's the same thing but flipped upside down. But you
Yeah.
don't say that when you see 999. You know, it's like 1999, Y2K happened. So it's not, there are things
Well,
there.
to me it's just like 77. I mean, they've used it for some purpose. Like what? No, like from when I know you only got like 2 minutes left, but from what I understand, Aleister Crowley believed from SK Bain, what SK Bain said is that Aleister Crowley believed that 77 was the power up to this mass spell,
Mm,
right? That's why they had so many at the Pentagon at once. In 93 is the Thelemic greeting. That's where you get Flight 93, 93 million miles away. I mean, he had a lot bigger influence from, according to S.K. Bain, than anyone realizes how much this guy influenced everything going on even still today.
yeah. Yeah, he definitely had a big influence. I recently did an episode like a couple months ago with someone. Cheney. Project Cheney is the name of her podcast, but she goes by a bunch of different names. I don't know if Cheney's the one right now, but Cheney, she had me on to talk about Crowley, and yeah, he's a fascinating character. I don't know much about his magic because I don't really care to learn about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah,
really
no,
like
you.
it. It
I
doesn't
don't
seem
open
like
those
it.
books. I do not open those
Yeah,
books.
but I did find it kind of interesting to look at his life from like a detective point of view and just kind of see what was written about how he wrote about himself. So I did an episode with her about like his life, but I don't know necessarily if I can say for sure like that he was good or bad. I think more cases than not, he was bad. Like he was a shitty person and like not good to people. But like I think he kind of had like in one way, a positive benefit to us because without him, maybe this stuff would have been harder to research. And I stick by that. Although everything else about him is shitty, like if he didn't write about all this occult stuff, it would just all be all the more harder for us to be able to point to these motherfuckers and say, you guys are up to some weird shit. So I think if anything, his only like upside is that he didn't know how to keep his mouth shut about all this stuff, right?
I
So
agree with you 100%, man. The evil is part of the good because I'll leave you with this. Once I realized, what my grandpa may have been into and how he got to the top of that, you realize that this guy dropped 5,000 bombs on people. There's a lot of evil that happened for me to even be here talking to you. And if he's off just destroying old world buildings and dropping bombs on people to hide the historical nature of where we came from, like imagine, like that's kind of a mind fuck. Like, so much evil, for him to be retired to the Florida Keys for where my dad would meet my mom.
mm.
So it's just like, man,
Yeah, but you can't look at it that way. I mean, of course he chose. I mean, if he was drafted, he didn't choose to do that, right? I mean, he was told to do that, and he obviously, even if he decided he wanted to join the military out of patriotism, he didn't cause the war to happen. So I wouldn't feel so hard on yourself like that. I mean, it definitely there's like a connection, sure, maybe like some karma that your family might integrate with that kind of thing going on. But the whole nation has dealt with that.
yeah.
The whole world. That's why they call them the world wars, you know?
Well, you remember the interview with Kate Griggs, right?
No.
Oh man. Okay, well, that we'll save that for
So
next time. We'll
the
save that.
interview from who?
So this interview, Kate Griggs, her husband was George Griggs, and he was in charge of wet ops for
Just like an
during
interview you can find on YouTube. Like if I search her name, will I find it?
maybe Reddit, but there's two famous Illuminati woman interviews.
Okay, okay.
There's Savali. Have you heard the Savali one?
Oh, this is both of these two things are new to me. I appreciate you sharing it.
Oh man, okay, Suvali, and then if you give me 5 minutes really fast, let me just explain this. Savali grew up a Illuminati daughter, a billionaire's daughter. She ended up, when she was 5 years old, they lock her in a room and they starve her from water and food for 5 days. And the mom keeps coming in drinking water in front of her. And this after the fifth day, she's pretty much on death's door and she thinks she's going to die. And the mom comes in one last time, drinks water in front of her, and leaves. And she just gives up. Then the butler comes in, gives her water, food, saves her. And this is part of their indoctrination to create these psychopaths. So then the next step after this is she goes to this ritual where there's these five kids, and the one in the middle gets his head split open by the priest that was leading the ritual, and they're all shocked, and he's like, no, it's all part of it. It's part of it. You're okay. You're everything's fine. But whatever they did with that kid, they didn't know. So then she ends up growing up in this system where she's teaching pretty much Moloch shit to the Illuminati kids in school because that's what they learn in school. They don't learn what we learn. They learn alchemy, they learn occult rituals, they learn Moloch and Ishtar, you know? And so she's teaching all of these people what they're learning in school to become the next generation of these elite parasites. And you could argue that they are even more indoctrinated than even the scientists, because they start them at like 5 years old, putting them in these psychopathic scenarios. So she ends up escaping, and now she's living on a missionary place somewhere in the world, no contact. But they say she's still alive, right? But it's a crazy interview. I'll try to send you the link if I can find it. And then the other one is a 9-hour interview. I watched the whole thing. Kate Griggs, her husband was George Griggs. He was pretty much a Navy SEAL assassin, but he served as the liaison to the Lebanese king in the 1990s. And what he would do is go over there and assassinate people and blame it on whoever Lebanon was fighting. And then they would keep selling the Lebanese guns, right? And she said that to get to the very top of where my grandpa and all these guys get to become high ranking officers, they pretty much have to go through some crazy, sometimes initiations, which are, are not so good in nature. Let's just say that. Because
Yeah.
I don't want to believe that my grandpa was into some really, really dark shit, but, you know, I'd watch those two interviews. They'll really open your eyes to
Yeah.
how things work on the other side.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. I've heard of similar things. Kathy O'Brien is one that comes to mind, and Simon Parks, although I don't know how much I
I
believe
don't
what
trust
he
that
said.
guy at all. He's such a
Yeah.
cute tard. Like he was freaking like, oh, any day Trump's gonna win.
Well,
Like
yeah, he was. I never followed up with him that with that. I listened to him like way before Trump, like in 2013 or 2014 somewhere. I remember seeing a video of him talking about shape-shifting mantises and things like
oh,
that.
okay,
And
yeah, that would have been interesting. But the Q
yeah,
people lost me, man.
yeah, I hear you. No, I'm with you. Trust me, I'm with you. But yeah, yeah, it's interesting. There's tons of rabbit holes, and yeah, you suggested me coming back on anytime, bro. Anytime. I'd
I
love
would
to
love to
keep
have
this
you back
going.
on, Mark. Thank you so much, man. You really came and educated the people, and you're a wealth of knowledge, and you're fighting God's fight. And I'm with you, man. I'm with all of you guys, and let's stay the course.
Right on. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it, man.
No problem.